The problem is we essentially live in an ageist society. It's everywhere. It's in our language, it's in the images that we see in TV, it's the way that we treat our older people in society. And you can't get away from it. So in the workplace, that unconscious bias around age is everywhere because it's part of our society.
Most organisations are not talking about age. In fact, some people say it's the last bastion of the acceptable prejudice or acceptable discrimination because it affects everyone. And because it affects everyone, it's okay to be ageist against young people, but also against old people. It works both ways.
My previous employer, I'd worked for them for quite a few years, just under 10 years, and I was one of 6 directors. So I was working around 60 or more hours a week, often getting in the office at 8 o'clock, leaving at 7 o'clock, and standing up on the tube all the way there and all the way back. I wasn't struggling with the job, but I was physically struggling with the commute and the hours. So I asked if I could have some flexibility, maybe go part-time, maybe 4 days a week or 3 days a week. Let's face it, I was probably working 6 days a week anyway. And I was just told no. They weren't prepared to compromise in any way at all. They weren't even going to have a conversation with me about it. So I went home, went back the next day, and I resigned.
I was made redundant when I was 47. They were basically taking out swathes of the most senior people and the most experienced people and bringing in fresh talent. I'd only been in the organisation for 5 years, and the only thing that happened was we took out the most senior in age in the organisation. We didn't take out the people who'd been there the longest. So saying that we weren't fresh can only have been related to age. I felt quite lost, quite honestly, because I really didn't know it was going to happen. I'm generally a confident person, but it did affect my self-esteem.
I think this is employers thinking, well, we can save some money by making our older workers redundant, which is clearly not a great approach to take. It's not a great way to end your working life. You really want to end your working life on a high and kind of go out with a bang.
The experience made me feel really undervalued. I felt like everything I'd done for the last 9 years hadn't been worth it. Made me feel useless and frustrated, and I was very tearful at the time because I felt that I wasn't able to continue.
The biggest challenge is to lose an experienced staff because you've got quite a huge burden of knowledge in there that they built over years, and when you suddenly lose them, you are losing a lot of skills that you can never capture in time. With a new or young employee, it will take years. And that period of building and trying to get that person to that stage, the organization and the industry will suffer a lot.
You have young people coming through, but no one there to really support and mentor them. So that can actually mean that it can take longer for them to hone their skills and to learn the job.
I joined Lloyds Banking Group on an apprenticeship. I was 20 and I'd only ever really worked in kind of bars and restaurants. And yeah, I joined the workplace, had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was probably the youngest in my team by 15, 20 years for the first 6 to 9 months of being at Lloyds. I really struggled to settle in. There are a lot of skills that are not so tangible, and actually you need people to teach those. You can't just rely on, online courses and things to do that.
I think alongside that, you're not losing people prematurely from the workforce. There's an opportunity to capitalise on those skills and that knowledge before they move on. And there's a real opportunity then for the organisation to get every single ounce out of that person before they decide to retire.
I think the key challenge around unconscious bias is that when we're in organisations, we absorb the prevailing culture unconsciously, obviously. So we don't even know that we've done it. And because we're busy, we're trying to make decisions and to move things on and to address things really quickly. It's so easy for us to just go with the easy solution and without realising that we're being affected by our own bias, but also the prevailing bias that's in the organisation.
Unconscious bias sort of plays out in the workplace through stereotypes. It's very easy to stereotype an older worker as being not so good at technology, or not wanting to get involved in training, or not being ambitious with their career. And those assumptions are rife in the workplace.
Things like older workers are less open to change. Older workers take more time off. They're coasting towards retirement. None of those are true. The evidence is actually the opposite of all of those things. So older workers do want to progress their skills, so 91% still want to progress and continue to develop. It's just they're surrounded by myths and assumptions that are not based on fact.
The stereotypes that you experience around age, really impact the individual, and I think they start to shape their own behaviour. And there's been research that say, older people, when they're told that they're no good at technology, perform worse when asked to do a technology task. So, in their mind, it definitely has an impact on their performance and their outlook on the rest of the world. You're losing the value of that individual by not valuing them enough.
For younger workers, I think the assumption is that they don't know as much, they haven't been around as much, they haven't seen it, how do they know? And of course that's a myth as well, because lots of people could have done a lot of things, or they might have a very different life experience to what we have.
There's a huge perception that, how can you be good at managing people or leading teams when you're so young? I do a lot of facilitating of workshops on how to be a high-performing team, for example, or how to deal with challenges and feedback. And quite often I come across people being like, how do you know what you're talking about when you're only 26? I've definitely suffered from imposter syndrome off the back of it. You have your own internal sense of, I'm young, and so actually do I know what I'm talking about? And when that's then met by someone, quite often perhaps older than me, making me question that, I'm like, oh, maybe they are right. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And I think that still is true 6 years on now. I definitely just, have to remind myself. I've created that course, I've looked into the research, I've understood the theory, I've been delivering it with loads of teams for a long time, and that's where I've got my experience.
I think the solution to the issue of unconscious bias is about calling it out and talking about it. It's about normalising the conversation around age. And as with all other areas in diversity and inclusion, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of those individuals and understand what it's like to be them and how best we can kind of work with them.
If we want to get the best out of people, it should be about us, not making assumptions about what you can and can't do, but actually giving someone the space to be the best that they can.
When it comes to recruitment, when an individual sees an advert and the language is clearly directed towards a younger individual, they're switched off and they won't apply for the role. Ultimately, you're reducing the size of the talent pool by being very specific in the way that you advertise for roles. So it all starts about how you construct the advert. And then again, I think it comes to how you structure the interview. If the panel is a group of very young individuals talking about a very modern workplace, you're potentially going to switch those individuals off from selecting the job. And if you want someone because of their communication skills and their experience, then you need to kind of take these things into consideration in the recruitment process.
There are quite a few organisations and companies that may not recruit people who they see being towards the end of their career. This sort of very short-sighted way of recruiting means that there's a whole generation of people who are expected to still be economically active, who can't get work, who end up doing jobs which are far less than their skills, and actually retiring early on very low incomes sometimes as well. People feel squeezed out of the job market because they're getting older. Well, I think people that I know feel that their career hasn't been worth very much. They forget all the great stuff they've done because they've had a really bad experience in their last couple of years.
One of the challenges we face in the workplace is we know that demographics are changing and that people are leaving the workplace early, and that we're going to have a real talent squeeze as we have less people joining the workplace from a smaller demographic at the younger end of the workforce. So we need to work much harder to keep our older employees in the workplace for longer.
The staff turnover, it's quite massive, where employers are not factoring in that adjustment in terms of age, having to work extensive hours without flexibility. In civil service, flexibility is a key element, and it's one of the things that have kept me in the department. And there are people in my team who are temp time, who are working partially retired, all kinds of work pattern that suits them and their family. And the retention rate is quite brilliant. But whereas what you find in my experience in the private sector, in the retail areas, recruitment, it's so frequent. And the number of staff that are leaving within coming in, it's so high. When you're training staff, you're not getting that optimum, getting them to that point where they perform at their best. And then the cost of you recruiting new ones as well. And so most of this sector fall to temporary staffs, 0-hour contract, just as a way to survive. And the lost skills has been lost.
I'll hold my hand up in this one, as when I was head of talent management in different organisations, head of learning and development, our learning spend was generally skewed to early careers. In fact, there's some evidence that shows 50% less is spent on older workers learning than on younger workers. And that is a very common situation, partly because we just think you have to invest in the future talent. But the key thing that we've forgotten as organisations is that the future talent is already employed. So as we're working longer, more and more people need to reskill, to retrain, to redevelop over time, because the talent is already in the organisations. So by focusing on people entering, we're missing the point. We need to really focus on people who are already there. To be honest, I think there's more than a gap when it comes to what organisations say and what they do. I think it's just that they don't even think about it around older workers. So it's not that they talk about it and then don't do something, they just genuinely don't often talk about it. But mostly, it's more than a gap, it's absolute neglect.
The first step in dealing with this issue is to add age to your diversity and inclusion processes and start looking through an age lens when you look at the business. It's about communication. You have to open up the channels of communication between the different age groups within the business, otherwise conflict will arise.
I created a network of what at the time was called the Young Professionals Network, and it was just a way for me to meet other people like me. I reached out to someone who was running a similar network that was focused on the older generation and those looking towards the end of their careers. And I became kind of mentored by this person who was, in a very much opposite position in terms of they were looking at what they were going to do once they'd finished their career. But actually, we discovered that we had quite a lot of similarities in the end, and we ended up joining together his network and mine, because we realised we had so many different common things that we were struggling with that all at the end of the day came down to things like age and assumptions around people's age.
Communication is key, and that's the only way to bridge any gap in any project, in any management team, or I think in anything in life really.
Individuals look to their manager to see how they should behave in certain situations. They might not behave as they do exactly, but they look to say, is that going to work for me and is it not? And depending on how they behave around age, it can really set the tone. So managers are role models in that instance, and it's a really responsible position in that sense.
We live in a very diverse society. And if you want to make policy or services that's not inclusive because you sat in your office, you make policy because you know the theories, you've not really spoken to those in the front line, you've not included everybody in terms of making any policy. And if you don't have that, it's very rare that you will get things right. Society and the services we provide to people, to a very diverse group of people.
If you can bring all these generations together and get them to have some kind of common goal, you'll actually really start to get the benefit of having different generations in one team. An example I would give is previously working in a pensions department, and I was talking about something to do with pensions and how it might be perceived by the younger generation. I got quite a lot of pushback that actually I was being a bit of a snowflake. And I thought, do you know what? So many of our customers are probably also snowflakes, just like I am, or are younger people with a similar perspective to me. And perhaps, we need to understand and see that actually you might not agree with each other's perspective, but there are lots of other people that have that perspective out there, and we need to listen to different people's perspectives.
All research suggests that age-diverse workforces are much more productive and much more innovative. My older workers have kind of more experience around managing client relationships, managing difficult conversations, and delivering services to clients. My younger employees come with the ability to challenge, and they challenge the way that we do the work. They come with new ideas about the way that we should work and the way that we deliver work to clients. So by getting the two groups to work together, I'm able to offer a much better service to our clients.
It doesn't matter what age a person is, it's more important that they're given the opportunity. If they've got the will and the ambition to be able to undertake a role, if they're given the opportunity to do that with the right training and the right support, you've got a fantastic opportunity.